Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Hospitality Marketing live show number 351. I am your host, Lauren Gray, and I welcome you to this bright and cheery Friday morning, 11:30 a.m. Eastern Central Time. For everyone watching us globally on our Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter accounts all over the world, thank you so much for taking the time. And again, always surprised for those in different time zones at strange hours that you still watch us live. But for those that would prefer better convenience, we also do and recast this show 11:30 a.m. Sydney Australian time and 11:30 a.m. London EU time, so that we can make sure it's a little bit more comfortable of a time slot for you all. As always, single topic, single hour. Our discussion today kind of revolves around something that came out of context with some client discussions as to the changing world of sales contracts. Now, with everything that has happened in the past 2 years, continues to happen. I shouldn't say it's not like we're at a conclusion of something. We're still in the midst of the progression of constant change. As we change and begin to reevaluate how we do business in the varieties of channels and sources of business that we do, one of the strong components of that is our relationship business, the ones that we do by contract, the ones that aren't the just walking in the door transient business, the ones that have to be negotiated because of the duration of demand and or the expectation of business that would allow them to have a different rate than for you and me to be walking in and being able to get a room that night or for a few days. And out of conversations I've had with clients, it's strange that we are constantly talking about the changes that has happened in our business profile these past couple of years plus when COVID first rolled in to where we are now. We've had the benefit curse of an incredibly pent up transient demand travel surge last summer. There are many of us in the industry that are looking to this summer as another growth and redemption, our ability to yield rates based on the demand that we are anticipating coming up for this summer. On this show, we've talked many times about the mitigating factors associated with what to anticipate for the level of business for this summertime. I've tried to put some water on the fire a little bit as to the inflationary impact, the uncertainty principles of politics impact, the supply chain issues, the labor issues, all of these things have a negative impact onto what's expected this summer. But there's a new component. I want to put a positive on some of this stuff too. And that is a lot of the things that have been postponed, events, cultural events, gatherings, conferences, and so forth, are beginning to roll up and are getting solidified and confirmed for this summer. Given the fatigue of society of saying we're going to have lockdowns or shutdowns or anything like this, I think the only weapons that are still going to be weapons. That sounds negative, but it's really fight against COVID. I think the only things that are going to be allowably tolerated in the scope of changes from what we are now to what we might have 3 months from now is the idea that masks would be required or not required. And that really depends on how successful the mandating was in the markets that you're traveling to. Why do I bring all this up about sales contracts? Because it is influencing our value proposition about sales contracts. We're seeing the fat, heavy fruit of transient business going, ooh, high rated business, short term stays, non committal, just a matter of getting in front of them and being the choice that they want, satisfying the demand that's coming to market. It is the preferred segment of people because of the high yieldability of the rates you can offer to them. Sales contracts, negotiated rates, LNRs, local negotiated rates for those, sorry for the acronyms, um, are those that have to be negotiated because you basically are doing a balancing of what it is that they need, what it is you can offer to satisfy that need that makes it equitable for them to sign to the commitment of the relationship that the contract refers to. These are your wholesaler contracts. These are your corporate negotiated. These are your consortia contracts. These are all, even your Smurf contracts come with some caveat as to what the value proposition is. For those that aren't occupying in this space or have not built in this space for quite a while, um, it is a matter of risk aversion and hedging your bets. It's kind of like you're gambling in strange ways because you're wanting to supplant the lower demand cycles with consistent business. That's where your negotiated rates with your airline crews, let's say. They're coming in every night. They're guaranteeing they're going to be always occupying and or paying for a certain number of nights per night. And for the times that you don't sell them off and you get free sell, and I have a fun story about that I can maybe share later. Then you get to double sell the room basically. If that's a demand that you have available and there's a need for it, you can actually airline crew doesn't use it or airline doesn't use it for delayed passengers and so forth. And you can still sell the room to somebody that walks in the door at 11 o'clock at night or 10 o'clock at night after the release happens. And release meaning that you are no longer obligated to hold that room for whoever contracted for it and it gets released for resale. And these negotiations, they know what value proposition they represent. And then a lot of these companies have been doing it for many, many years. So they understand what it means. They know that you only want to give them rooms when you have a rooms to give, meaning low demand cycle. And they know that they're going to be having rooms when you would prefer them not to have rooms because of high demand cycles. So it's a balancing of commitment and obligation contractually to balance that even flow. Now, hotels have a finite perishable inventory. I'm speaking to the choir when I say this, but let's keep numbers simple. You have a 100-room hotel. So a certain percentage of those rooms get sold to, let's say, wholesalers. Wholesalers are people that, um, for lack of a better way, are saying they're going to drive business to you if they are given an offer rate that they can sell and add to it when they package it with all the other things that they sell through. We've seen a huge transition in this industry over the few years. Major players, Coke and so forth, falling apart and disappearing and what have you. But the industry is still there, just different names and faces. So wholesalers, you oversell, meaning if you gave an obligation of that 100-room hotel that 20 rooms a night were going to be towards wholesalers, okay, and you have a 95% occupancy of in-house already, you're really technically at 115% book because you still have that obligation to wholesalers of 20 rooms. The reality of it is, because of the dates and the times, it is most unlikely that a wholesaler is going to fulfill their room block allocation that day when you can sell it to others. So you don't mind overbooking your inventory because you don't have to walk anybody because nobody's walking in the door that you have to walk. What has happened in times now is that without proper contract negotiations with wholesalers, and even then they break the rules, is that you're telling them only through their channel and only through them can they book the inventory that you're allocating to them. What we have seen perpetually over the years before COVID and for many years beyond that even is wholesalers free selling their wholesale rates, giving it away to other affiliates that can sell their packages, but not because they've been bundled with something and turned opaque. They're just free selling the lower negotiated rate that you've offered the wholesalers for the perpetuity of their business. And they're free selling that below your rates, and people, no name affiliates, are selling this stuff and making their commission off of it. And then you have somebody walking in the door that's $15-20 below what you're asking for that room or more, and you have to honor it because it was booked through a negotiated relationship with a wholesaler. Because of that, you have to basically jump on the wholesalers to catch them in their own bad hands. You literally have to badly book through a no-name affiliate, find out the booking vehicle that was used for it, and then go to the wholesaler that allowed this to happen and shove it in their face and say, "You're screwing up. If you do this, I'm penalizing you. If you do it again, I'm cutting you off." And have that within your contracts. A lot of places don't do this. Why? Because they have purged so many of their sales teams that have the knowledge of doing this, and they have order takers. They have people in the departments. Should they even still have people in their sales departments, or should they been able to find people to come back to their sales departments after furloughing so many people and what have you? There was a great sales purge prior to COVID, and that now has been touted for many times now as being a foolish direction of our industry. And so you have lost a lot of competent people that know how this all works to get in front of these guys' faces and say, this is what's going to be on paper, and this is the penalties for violating this contract. That has to be a part of the negotiations you have with wholesalers. That's just one contractual relationship. I want to talk more about the sales contracts, the decisions for the relationships. Let's say, for instance, a company that represents airline crews. Now, airline crews, as you know, are always between points and references between where they fly to and where they fly from, so forth and so on. And a very large portion of an air crew's time is not spent in their home base. Those are for senior relationship crews that can make it home at the end of the day. They're on a route. It's the same route. They leave in the morning, they go back a few times and forth, and then they end up at home at the end of the day. That is not the norm for most crews. Most crews are they fly and they fly to different places based upon what they've been assigned to that day. And at the end of the day, they're in a town that they don't live in and they need accommodations. There's a whole business related to supporting crews for airlines as to where they stay, what are the requirements for them to be even a negotiation for them to stay there, because justifiably, air crews have certain demands that other travelers don't. They have odd hours. They have things that they want the rooms to be like blackout curtains and so forth that allow the crews to sleep at the odd hours that they do. The housekeeping knows exactly their responsibility, although that has dynamically changed in the past couple of years as well. But all of these things are conditions of the contract. Now, they also over the years have known that what they bring to the table is a high value for hotels that are, no, I wouldn't say desperately because that seems like an overemphasis, that are strongly willed to have a baseline of business. What do we mean by this? Let's take the example of the 100 room hotel again. 100 room hotel, you want a baseline of business to build other transient business on. If your transient business represents on an evening basis between 30 and 40 rooms, if you only pursued transient business and had no other relationships with under anything else, you'd have a 30 to 40% occupancy, possibly 50, considering walk-ins and unassigns and so forth. But for the most part, you would not be a profitably successful hotel. Base business, a term that's often used, is business that is contractually on your books every evening because of related relationship contracts that you have with a variety of vendors. Now, just saying they're going to possibly book a room doesn't mean that you make the revenue from it. It means that they have the option to buy that room. What you have to keep, as I pointed out in just a bit of earlier conversation, is you don't make it a buy sell option. They can't sell it off if they don't themselves use it. That's the problem that exists with underrated business. So airline crews are really unique because the companies that represent them, the airline businesses in particular, sometimes do this as well, will guarantee purchase of the rooms. And that means that they always want these numbers of rooms per night. So they always have a guaranteed place where the crews can go. And a lot of times, crews, like I said, require transportation. They require certain amenities, breakfast facilities, lunch facilities, conditions of the room, size of the room, whatever it is, they need functionality at a baseline level that is part of the contract requirement. With that, now, say for instance, 10 rooms gets blocked for an airline crew each night for the course of the year, because these are longer term contracts. Sometimes they require a 3-year commitment, 5-year commitment, depending upon what they're willing to pay and offer and how much you want their business as to what you're willing to give them for this. But now that's 10 rooms that you don't have to sell out of your 100. Now that's 30-40% transient gets added on top of those 10 rooms that the airlines had. Well, that's the modality of what sales deals with. Sales deals with these core continuous relationships. Airline crews is the only example I'm pulling out, but there are other examples of businesses that are locked in for numbers of rooms. You have lots of companies that have requirements for training facilities, people moving always constantly. A company in a business next to your hotel or in proximity to your hotel might always have a relatively steady stream of people coming to their office buildings for training and or orientation and or because of business travel or what have you, which is where we have this big interest about business travel being different now than it had been prior to COVID. So all of this is about the ability to create this base business. Now, this is negotiated business. Smurf business, although contractual, is not the same that we're discussing right now, because Smurf business is the weddings, the fraternal order reunions, the family reunions, what have you. They have contracts of obligation, but they're one-time things, not perpetual relationship, corporate negotiated relationships, local negotiated rates. What are the local negotiated rates? Well, you go out to businesses in your market and you say, when you need a hotel room, you come to us and we offer this rate for you. Should you guarantee a certain number of room nights per year, we can even enhance that value of the room rate that you have to pay because of your commitment to us of demand. Now, This brings up a very active dialogue that most people don't know unless you've been into sales, and that is about fulfillment of contracts. Let's take an example of a local business. Let's say it's a service industry business that's in proximity to your hotel, which is why they're interested in you. You have a convenience factor to them, and they're going to have people coming in and out for whatever reasons they need, and they can stay at your hotel. They know how often they plan on having their people come through. Say it's 2 or 3 people that stay for 3 to 5 nights once a month. Okay. So now you have 5 room nights per reservation, say 5 people coming in. That's 25 room nights, okay, per night for 1 week. So now you're talking about 125 room nights out of a week, 100 room hotel. So 5 room nights a night, 5 room nights out of your 100 are blocked for that week that they're there. You can probably offer them a decent rate because of that consistency. Doesn't mean they're guaranteeing it that they'll pay it regardless of whether they need it. It's they have that rate availability, but they have the demand commensurate with it. And this is where a lot of the negative impact happened to a lot of hotels is when through COVID, all of this stopped. All of these contracts couldn't be enforced because there was no recourse. Hey, they can't travel because the government's saying no, and or health code saying no, and the reason for the contract can't be mandated. Here's the problem. Say, for instance, that same company says, well, we might be able to up this to 10 rooms a night, for a full week, once a month, and we offer them a better rate. Okay. But what if they only stayed at the 5 rooms? You gave them a better rate, but you didn't get the benefit of that better rate. You put money back on the table because you lowered their rate under expectation they would do more business for you. Who tracks that? Salespeople. Salespeople look at pace and product. Yes, revenue management people can ask the questions. Yes, they can go over and look at the information. And yes, revenue management people have had to mantle this themselves a lot because salespeople have been taken out of the equation for a lot of reasons. But for the most part, salespeople, the initiator of the contract relationship, maintain the monitoring of those contracts to make sure they're at the fulfillment that they were promised. If not, then in the contract, there should be a place and point where a reference is made that says, if by this point you haven't come up to this threshold of room night count, then we are not obligated to maintain the rate that was negotiated for you because of the expectation of the room night count that you offered. So therefore, we're going to up the rate because you're not hitting your goals. Okay. That's one variable. Another variable is demand quotient. If over the course of the year, I say I'm going to give you 100 room nights per month, okay? And I know I'm probably not going to hit 100 room nights as the vendor that's offering this for, let's say, 6 months out of the year, the low demand points. I just can't get somebody to travel to your market that particular month. So for 6 months, I'm not really going to hit my 100 night goal. But the 6 month that I have, that I do know, okay, that I can hit my goal, then that's all great. Except for that's also the time when the hotel can probably most likely sell better rate in transient business. So somebody has to monitor that relationship. That if a wholesaler or another contractual relationship says we're going to do this much business with you, give us a better rate because of it, but then only uses it at the peak demand point, where it's a really great deal because you gave them a very low rate at a time when you can call for a very high rate. And yet when you need them to fill the gaps on your low demand, they're not there providing inventory. Somebody has to go to them and say, you did not fulfill your contract. And the contract needs to be clear about the continuity of demand. If at certain, what you do is you take your downtime and you figure what they should have as a room night obligation. And if they haven't hit it by the time that demand cycle comes up, you penalize them. You didn't hit your room count. We can't guarantee these rates or offer those rates. This is the rate we can give you during peak demand because you didn't fulfill the low demand. Unfortunately, so many businesses are not doing this the way they used to do it. Whether it's the manpower in the department to actually do it, whether it's revenue management saying, look, I don't handle contracts, okay? I handle the impact of contracts. And for that reason, I'm just letting you know we're giving this really dirt cheap rate to this company when they haven't earned it. And unless somebody, general manager, if there's no sales director of sales, or corporate or management service or whatever, needs to step in and go to that company and go, guys, you didn't hit your goal. Well, here's the problem. If you didn't outline in the contract with them that they had a goal to hit before the high demand period where you're now suffering the negativity of the relationship, then they're going to look at you and go, yeah, so what? Well, you gave us a rate, you guaranteed it for a year. You didn't tell us there was an obligation of a threshold before we went into this period. Now we have the demand. You should be happy. And they know very well you're not because you're giving them a low rated business piece during a high rated time. So these things have to be done with contracts. It all has to be thought through before the contract gets signed and obligated for performance. And this is not being done on a consistent basis. I will be getting back to sales. I want to throw one more in here, which is OTA relationships. A lot of times, when I wouldn't say desperate, again, a negative word, when highly motivated for finding any business that there is to find because of whatever we've been going through for whatever reason of demand to your market, you'll go to be with anybody. OTAs leverage this to the hilt, which established them in our industry permanently back in 9/11, 2001, where it was so much about hotels that have never faced that kind of impact to their business cycle before that they were looking for anybody that could sell them a room and they're willing to offer anything for it. And OTAs took full advantage of that. They said, sure, give us your inventory. We'll spend all the money that we can on selling your hotel, but you have to give us 25, 30% commission when it does. Okay, because hey, 70%, 75% of something is better than 100% of nothing. And they did. And they signed contracts to that. And then all of a sudden, business started coming back and they're like, oh my gosh, we're giving 25% for the business that's coming through them, and we can't turn the spigot off. It's broken. They're going to keep fees, and we have to keep sending them these checks because we have a contract for it. Did we learn from that? No. Did the same thing in 2008 all over again, where we were desperate to find business. People ran off to the OTAs. Anybody, OTA, by the way, online travel agency, ExpediaHotels.com, just in case, to find anybody that would drive business for them. Unfortunately, we even have a lot of hotels that look at it and say, well, I'd much rather spend 20%, 25%, well, let's say 20%, fractions have come down since then, 20% for commissions and not have the burden of responsibility of marketing myself or anything else. And in some cases, some hotels not even running their own PMS system, letting the Expedias and the hotels of the world be their only booking agent. So everything that they do runs through them. They figure it's worth the 20%. It's mind numbing because they try to justify it mathematically. No, I'm only paying 20% for everything we get, but I've saved all these other costs. And you also don't control your own destiny, because what happens is the Expedias or the hotels.com of the world or anybody else can put you at the top of the list or the bottom of the list. And unless you continually feed them, where you need to keep giving them more money, where they're like, hey, look, unless you pay this kind of money for us to advertise you, we're not going to do this. You don't show up, and therefore you're obligated. You're indebted to them. You have no alternative to what they're doing for you, should they not do the same for you anymore. So even though you may have started as a favorite child, if you don't keep that relationship, you get to the bottom of a list that you just can't generate enough business from. So those contracts, we'll touch on those again in a little bit, but I want to make sure that contracts are a very key element to this whole dialogue discussion as to how we determine our business structure, our demand to business, our channel contributions associated with the hotel. So going back to sales contracts, we're all facing these types of choices right now. So here we are. It is now end of April, going into May. We are about 5-6 weeks ish from the first initial summer push. Well, business is going to keep going up for a lot of places. Okay, domestically is what I'm referring to most, and internationally, Canada and so forth. Same kind of demand cycles. In Europe, same thing. May is a very strong demand month, incredibly strong, probably one of the peak times. And even given the concerns and politics we talked about in previous shows, there's still the need for travel. So on the board are companies coming to you now that have not been around for a couple of years, saying they want to reestablish contractual relationships with you. They want to start defining their willingness to create a contract with you for rooms and room nights in exchange for a better rate compared to what they can find just in general inventory. What happens? How do you weigh that? You're looking this summer going, "Oof, well, I don't want to give away any much of anything because I'm probably going to have an amazing, hopefully amazing transient demand. However, reality as it be, maybe that demand isn't what I expect it to be. And for that reason, having this business will keep the lights on, so to speak. That compression. Okay, my base inventory is there. It's a much lower rate than what I can get elsewhere, but it's always there. So, how do you weigh that? How do you weigh the anticipation expectation? And you're really asking this is the matter of whether you can make payroll and pay for your fixed overheads, or whether there's margin for profit, or whether there's margin for capital expense, whether there's margin for operation, or whatever, cash flow for payroll. These are the decisions that directly affect those answers. Where is this money going to come from? And how much of it is going to come by the choices I make? And that turns into an interesting perspective of evaluating sales contracts called displacement analysis. I find it a lost art in lots of ways. Um, and this happened long before COVID, even years before COVID. I found that most people couldn't mathematically calculate a displacement analysis anymore in their head, or I actually made an app for it at one point. It's long since gone or whatever, but the idea of it was discussing a piece of business, evaluating its total contribution, ancillary revenues, and everything else like this. How much is it really worth? So even though it may be a lower rate than you like, the ancillary value in combination to the rate that they're paying at a time of what other demand is in market for those dates, you determine the value proposition. Is it worth it or not worth it? And it's always fascinating to watch people because whenever I gave scenarios in classes about how to look at this, guessing never worked. I wouldn't say never, rarely worked because oftentimes you see things at face value, but you don't see the depth of the value. We've gone through scenarios for Smurf business of a wedding piece coming in with a room block coming in, and the room rate business being room rate for it being so low in comparison to what is demand at that time, and it was looked at like, well, why would we want to take that when we can sell that same room for such and such? Because of the ancillary revenues, the event itself, the payroll that it covers for the people that we don't have events for to cover normally, the banquet staff and so forth, perhaps. It contributes to that. That gives a longevity value. Like that event could literally pay payroll for what we have to charge for it for three times its length duration of time. Um, and ancillary revenue to your outlet services, your restaurants and spas and golf or whatever it is, those revenues get calculated, which also sustains the department's profitability or at least sustainability. Those aspects now make it so that the room rate that is substantially lower than what you can call for that, those people coming in deference that we would pay that high, that would pay that higher rate would not have the impact that that event would have for all the other stuff. Yes, they might still use the spa, they might use the golf or whatever have you. Those things. That's where the displacement analysis comes in. You calculate the impact of the group and the event and calculate the value of it not being in the space and seeing how those two numbers compare. And a lot of times, then you have to determine the margin of variability as to, well, this falls in that if we do this, there's the anticipated values that aren't mathematically calculatable, which is impact of people knowing this happened, the additional value of people now being discovered to our hotel and resort, the value of what we do as a industry, as a segment where we do good weddings. This is an example of the next one that adds value for perpetuity of demand for business. Those numbers don't really work as numbers sometimes, they work as perceptions. And that all comes into the conversation of displacement analysis. That has to come into your sales discussions. Relationship building. It's not just about the contract of a crew coming in from an airlines that you have to calculate for. You have to calculate on the value proposition of what that relationship with that company that does that with you means. If they come to you and you can work out a relationship of room rate and inventory availability and what have you, then you turn into a perpetual resource for them that you have a relationship with already. Whenever you go to these RFPs, requests for proposals, you're initially, without them knowing the difference between you and anybody else, you're the same as anybody else. What you're pitching is looked at in the same face value that other pitches are made at. What's the rate that they're offering, the inventory they're offering, and the conditions they're offering it in. They don't know you, they don't know your team, they don't know your crew. Some companies are smart and they look at the reviews of your product, they look at the condition of your product, and they determine that even though your price may be asimilar to somebody else's RFP proposal in return, your caliber and or quality makes you different than the other hotel that seems similar to you in numbers. That is a salesperson's job. That sales team member has to be the person that makes sure that those things don't get missed in the discussion. It's just not replying to the mathematics associated with an RFP request for that type of business. It's about whether or not there's other things to it that validate why you're a better candidate for it. Displacement analysis has to be calculated. It has to be looked at in a hedging fund way. I hope it's this busy, but what do we do if it's not? That should be a condition of relationship for any of these approaches to contract. Yeah, I would love for people to be lined at my front door paying rack rate back of the door prices like they did last summer. But the reality is, there's no guarantee or certainty of it. There's a probability of it, but not a certainty of it. If there's a confidence factor, what number would you give it? If it's below 80%, it's likely you're going to have to do something to hedge that bet. What do I mean by hedging? Well, from the financial world, you you bet on the side that you think it's going to happen, but you also bet against yourself a portion that means that the absorption of the loss, should it be an unexpected loss, isn't as severe. You're hedging your bet. Okay. Same too with contracts. You may not like the impact at the times where you feel like you can be rock stars and get huge demands and great value and everything else to it. But by the same token, you have to make sure there's a fallback. A lot of hotels are not operating with a full crew. It sounds kind of silly, right? It's like, not right. It's one marble missing. A lot of the exec teams in hotels are one leg short. They have maybe a revenue manager and a GM. They may have a food and beverage person, maybe not, depending upon their ancillary services. They may have a marketing person or not. They may have a salesperson or not. They may have management team, corporate, that is their sales team. They themselves at the property don't. What happens is, if the corporate sales team is not empathetic and truly understanding the property, then they can't represent the property to its full capacity. They're handling the math, they're handling the function, contracts being signed, so forth, and then tell the property what they've obligated them to. That, as you can hear by the way I say that, is not probably the best complete way of approaching these contracts. All of these contracts have to be based on a probability of what do you really think is going to happen. We've talked about math in relationship to this, and we've gone in the show and talked about how to create an average weighted mean value proposition, pre-COVID, COVID, transitional COVID, forecast, adding that all together and creating some semblance of prospective value as to what trend would be. That doesn't mean it's right. It just means it gives you a benchmark that says, is it at, above, or below this value? That's all it is. And a lot of times, the sad part is that usually it's sitting right there on the line saying, well, it can be what we already forecasted is. It could be higher based on the anticipation of what it could be unexpected or changes that are on a positive impact. And we can focus only in on the good. Okay. Or it could be less than that because of the conditions that we think are present that are going to dampen the overall performance of what we think is going to be business sourcing. I know that's not an answer for these things, but it is literally the polarity of the perspectives that creates. Either you're an optimist, pessimist, or you're balanced on the what's the reality of the current circumstance. A lot of this is about your forecast quality of what you anticipate, and the sad part is a lot of forecasting that's going on has a lot of finger pointing. Well, I only used the data you gave me, and you told me that you wanted it in the way that we've always done it, or whatever excuses that it is excuse ridden as to how these forecasts get told that it's nobody's fault. It's an unfortunate miscalculation based on a data that was not available and or interpreted the way that it was given. Blah blah blah. What happens is somebody gets hurt by it. Payroll doesn't get met, or teams have to be let go, or service value goes down, or ownership's revenue stream gets dried up. They have to invest more into maintaining the property. That's the detriment of poor forecasting performance. But what's often got forgotten about these is the influences that you can create with it, with the tools that you do have. Good contracts that solidify it mitigates the variables as to performances and the conditions of those performances. That's a key element. If this happens, then this. If this doesn't happen, then this. Those conditions. And also marketing. How can you influence, hedge your bet, so to speak, as to the performances? What I mean by this is, if you're anticipating summer, let's say, for example, the summer is going to be a strong demand cycle for you. Are you going to sit back and let the wave hit you? Like, okay, I know it's coming. I don't have to spend the money. I don't have to make sure that I'm in front of the line, because it's going to be more than all of us can handle. I can get the business I want without having to spend for it. There's logic and argument to that point. The reality is, if that be the case, what about how can you yield it better by being in the front of the line, by being the leader in your market, by identifying soon and fast the people that are willing to pay at the times that they're willing to pay, and to augment those demand granularities with a continuity of contracts and sales and support of business that makes it balanced, so that even though you may not be the rock star in your RevPAR, or the rock star in your occupancy, or the rock star in your ADR with your star report, you overall are the number one performer in your market, because you mitigated the roller coasters, peaks and valleys, with a more continuous growth and stability of the work that you are, of the business that you're generating. Now, if this sounds like a bit of a cop out saying, no, 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 let's take the rocket and the comet. Let's do everything we can whenever it can, stellar performance. And if we fail, that we have gaps and drops and valleys, that's only because we're just leaning into the whole process of being the ultimate rate driven, occupancy driven, whatever driven that you have. And they're in contrast to each other, by the way. And you have winners in the market and you have losers in the market. The ones that are stable and consistent in their pattern of growth, sustainability, and consistency are the ones that are coming back to the well again this year. I say that in retrospect to people, hotels that had great reputations going into summer last year, but were so desperate to refill the coffers that were depleted dry through all of the mandates and the shutdowns and the no travels and so forth, that they forwent some of their core philosophies with lack of team, lack of service, and they destroyed their perception in market, I'm looking for the word, um, their image, as being a good place. But people going and saying, "This is terrible. You guys used to be great. Now there's nobody to give me service. I can't go to the restaurant because it's closed. Blah blah blah. And yet you're charging me 3 times as much as the last time I was here." A lot of hotels did that, and now this year rolling around, it's not forgotten. There's a lot of people that look and see those reviews and go, wow, this place really went downhill from what it was before. And yes, there's excuses of lack of staff and COVID and new protocols and so forth. But the reality of it is, the people that stayed with you during that time when they're paying the peak rate had a terrible experience. The nice part is, the hotels that didn't sacrifice their quality, that may have limited their inventory availability, that mitigated their rates to a certain degree, and then not necessarily having to, but maybe just handle the business that they could handle at the level of service that they always have done. And now rolling into this summer, going, this is great. We have a great reputation. We have a great perception in the market as to what we are. We show good value for what we are. And people are looking in depth to understand that the rate, however high it will be, because of inflation and everything else going on, is acceptable, because the anticipated value of the service and the product quality are going to be there, compared to other hotels that it's not. So it's going to be an interesting fallout this summer as to how the hotels that just threw that out the window and did whatever they could to rack rate out are going to fare. Now, they're going to get business anyway, because they're a hotel where people want to go. How well they do business in comparison to the other hotels is yet to be determined. How well that is compared to hotels that are balancing out their long-term relationships, because right now, these companies that are coming to you saying, "Okay, I can block 10 rooms, X number of nights a week, X time period. I want it for a year. I want this kind of rate. I want these conditions in the room," and so forth. are the ones that may have been turned away from other hotels because they're like, I'm not going to take your business when I can get this kind of business. Those hotels will be remembered by them and they will not be approached again by them because they are not being respected for what they have as value. That's been made the scenario where there are good people and there's bad people on our side. Let's flip that over. We're good people and they're bad people on that side. They go over and come in expecting everything to be given to them because they know that most hotels are desperate for levels of base business and types of business, and they're going to demand too much because they feel like they have the leverage to do so because a hotel is not at the profitability levels that it would like to be, and this represents chunks of business that will give them sustainable income. So bad people on both sides happen that way. Now, ultimately, the best is good people on both sides. I have product and inventory and a value proposition that's good. You're coming in with requests that you would, yes, I have to negotiate and give you value for what you're giving me, but I also have the contract outlined in such a way that we both understand the relationship that we're going into, the commitment of what they're offering and their obligations and benchmarks of that commitment and the commitment of service, quality, and consistency that we're offering entering that relationship as well. So I always like to think that the contract negotiations and the ways that they happen are a two-sided benefit. They get what they needed at the price that they're close to wanting to have had. You're getting a value proposition that you're close to ability to mitigate for the ups and downs of their demand for when you have low demand versus high demand, and the price is enough to balance with that. The problem is in today's sales contracts is a lot of the people in those conversations are not familiar with being in those conversations, and they're not familiar with the prioritization of the conversations as to how to get to that point. They're looking at it as an all or nothing, as in my Star Wars world, as in Sith, they're a deal in absolutes. It's all or nothing. Our political commentary is a lot like that. Either you agree with me with everything, or you don't disagree. You completely disagree with me about everything. The idea is that there will be times contractually that they get the benefit of the contract. That's called mitigation and equilibrium and coming to a middle ground. And there are times where you get the benefit of the contract. Again, same thing, same preference, same reference. The idea is that the two times that happens, or the times that it happens, keep it at about the same place. You win, they win. You lose, they lose. It's there's an averaging of all of this. That's what negotiations are. Compromise is. Contracts are compromise. You're giving something that they perceive as value that you want a value in return for. The real question about these contract negotiations is stability and consistency. Nobody wants to be the fool that takes all low contracted business and then they're obligated out the yin yang and they can't take the business that's at their doorstep that's high rated because they have an over obligation to other people like these contracts that have pre-sold their inventory and took advantage of them at a weak point where they were willing to give away low rated inventory to keep stability. Nobody wants to be those people. By the same token, everyone wants to be the person that was smart enough to have taken that business when other competitors that they're fighting against didn't, and they have a sustainable income that allows them to weather the downturn that all of their competitors are feeling right now because they took that business. Everybody wants to be the hero. Problem is, you can't always be both. You will at some point be a hero and the martyr, all in the same. You were hailed for having picked up the business when nobody else had business. You used to have people walking in the door, and then by the same token, you're being uh, burnt because they're seeing business come in at low rate business in deference to business that they could have gotten at high rate business. The idea is mitigating those variances, ups and downs, by contracts. Contracts mean that you don't have to go into an owner and say, we gave that low rate, even though they produced no business when we needed it. And now we're stuck giving them a low rated piece of business when we have all this demand on our doorstep. That's poor contract negotiations. You would much rather be the person that goes over and says, hey, they gave us this much business when nobody else had business to give to us. And this is our payback to them during this peak time that they're now able to leverage that rate, which is much lower than what we could get other people coming in the door for. But you can't have cake and eat it too. They covered our bills when we needed bills to be covered at a low point, and this is our compensation back to them where they're able to to capitalize on a low rated opportunity during a high rated time. This takes smarts for contracts, and this also takes smarts from logistics and strategies with everybody involved in the decision process, whether it's the property's general manager, the property's revenue manager, property sales team, corporate revenue management, corporate operations. Everybody has to determine the ratio of value, the goods and the bads for all of this. The problem that happens with a lot of this is that you get too many opinions, and everybody wants to contra another opinion so that they can be right. Oh, Lauren says we should do this. Well, you know what? I'm going to hedge my bets. It's a 50-50, right? So I'm going to say it was the dumbest thing ever to do. Don't do it. That way, if it works out that Lauren was wrong, I look like a rock star and I'm smart and I have business collateral to go back into the next conversation and say, well, Lauren disagrees with me. Well, how successful was it on that one contract? That's the leverage that comes in. The politics of this begins to come into play. And that's an unfair compensation for this because it's about revenue and sustainability, profitability, margins, budgets, those kind of things. But the idea is a sales team has to be cognizant of the perceived value. Salespeople have always come in with the worst rate business for all the best reasons. Salespeople have always struggled with this. Salespeople are always at odds with revenue yield when it comes to inventory availability, rate availability. They're always being held back, from a sales position when I used to be corporate sales and company sales, right, of all the hats I've worn, all of them, um, is going into the conversation and being told, well, there's no reason we're going to pick that piece of business up, Lauren. That's $20 less than we can get off the door. Why do we want to do that? And unless you have your justifiable reasons, well, they're also going to give us rooms when it's $20 above what we can get from people walking in the door, and they're guaranteeing this amount of business during that time. And this is where the contract negotiations come in. You have to be clear and how you're fencing that commitment so that you don't get caught later on going, well, gee, Lauren, you said they were going to give us that much business at those rates, but they didn't provide that inventory because in the contract they didn't have to. There was no fence post for them and no hurdle for them that says if they didn't hit this level by this point, we were not obligated to offer the rates when it was against us. That's the contract negotiation that has to come into play. And that's not about being friends in the contract negotiation. That's being hardcore, sitting across the desk from the person that's wanting to do a contract with you and saying, no, if you don't hit this threshold by X date, okay, which is our value proposition, why we want to get in a relationship with you, then you don't get the value of why you're in the relationship with us about the lower rate when we have a demand that we can sell elsewhere. Those compromises are key elements to the company's relationship. Um, those benchmarks, those times have to be, because that's the other thing too. It actually has to be enforced. It's one thing to even have it in the contract, but if you're not enforcing it, then it's useless. I kind of equate it to, and I made this story in a presentation I did at, I forget which college it was. Anyway, um, where I said it's a lot like when you go flying, and this goes back to the zone things. There's, for me, for an example, American Airlines was you had zone 1 through 4 over here, which was the elite ones. Those are the guys that got on the plane first, girls, people, whatever, got on the plane first, and then you had zone 5 through whatever on the other side, which was anybody else there. And I was always frustrated with the gate crews at the airlines that the people would say, all right, we're going to be boarding zone 3 or 2 or 1 or whatever. And people get in line to get in. And I'm looking down at their tickets and they're zone 9. Okay. See how that goes for them. And they go right up to the girl or guy. The person scans it, doesn't enforce it, and allows them to go on well ahead of anybody else that should have gotten on the plane ahead of them. The idea is that they didn't enforce the rule. So that man just turned into a cattle rush. Then at that point, as soon as it was discovered, where they turn around to somebody else and go like this, everybody else that they know or didn't know or they saw that, like, well, they're not holding this up. They're just letting anybody in that's standing in line. Then being nice doesn't win. Being the fact that you're waiting until your zone is called doesn't count. And you just might as well go in there ahead of time so you do have a place for your luggage and all that other stuff. Enforcing the rules is just as important as having the rules in that sense. As also to negating the rules, where it's like, you know what, there's only 10 of you waiting to get on the plane. I don't think we need to worry about zones. Come on board. That's a good time that you don't need to enforce the rules. The idea of contracts is to outline the relationship. The next step is the enforcement of that when applicable. If a contract happened that they was to both mutual benefits, where they were giving you a ton of business when you needed it, and this was the greatest thing since sliced bread, and thank goodness we had this contract. And then all of a sudden, come peak season, they don't need the rooms. They may have not planned for that. You didn't plan for it, but the fact of it is, they don't need them. That's cool because now you get to do whatever it is you want to with those rooms and sell them elsewhere. That's where the airline crew kind of conversation comes in. Going back to the story I was about to say. So, my first MOD shift at a hotel in Houston, at the Intercontinental, um, we had this huge obligation with a local airline that they had literally hundreds of rooms because they needed them in case they had any delayed or canceled flights. They had to basically have a place for the people that were displaced to go to spend the night until the next available flight was out. At a certain time of night, 10 o'clock at night to be exact, those rooms got released so that if I needed to sell them elsewhere, I could. There was a constant dialogue between air carriers as to them having different cancellations. I mean, Intercontinental was a huge hotel, I mean, huge airport. A lot of international flights, for a variety of reasons, got canceled, and or long haul domestic flights and so forth. And you had hundreds of people that needed to stay at a hotel until they were elsewhere, and the airlines were obligated to find this for them. So having a negotiated rate and rooms blocked for them was a key element of that relationship, and then it paid well because those rooms were paid for. Well, a very vigilant, very over vigilant front desk person decided that they hadn't heard from the airline that had this block with us. And it was about 9 p.m., 9:30 ish, and they had a bunch of people. They had another airline that was calling asking for displacement rooms, and felt that it was safe enough to early release them to the other carrier and let them use the rooms. So we get to basically double bill for these rooms. This is my first MOD shift, by the way. I get a call at 10:15 ish that night down on the radio. I'm like, hello over there. It's like, can you come to the front desk? We have a crisis. What? I'm MOD for my first night. I'll go up there. It turns out that the air carrier that had the contractual block with us did need the rooms, and they sent the flight passengers over to use those rooms. Also, the air carrier from the front desk that told them, sure, send the people over. We had buses of hundreds of people, both trying to get into the same rooms, basically. Total cluster. Total. Because contractually, we had to give rooms to the carrier that contract with us. The other carrier, of course, cited the fact that they were told that these rooms were available. I spent the rest of that night and early morning literally driving our airport shuttle bus to any hotel that had empty rooms that we paid for, whatever rate they called, walk rate or not, to get them a place to stay. Plus, I had to coordinate the fact that those same people would be picked up and brought back to the airport for the next available flight that they had to be on the next day. Hundreds of people. This is the power of contracts. I learned really fast. It was like, why would you? And obviously, the detriment to the front desk person, well intended as they were, front desk manager, they made a mess, and they caused a massive amount of cost, because even though we had the rooms and they were ended up being used, it was low rated business under contract, but we had hundreds of other rooms that were obligated to give to people that we didn't have a contract with, but we had told them they had the rooms available that we had to pay for elsewhere. And this wasn't the only circumstances of everybody looking for a room. So we're paying premium price, not just walk price. By the way, walk rates are when you negotiate with a local hotel saying, hey, look, if I have to walk somebody, meaning I can't accommodate them, I have to send them elsewhere. What kind of rate can you give me to send them down to you that I have to pay? That's a walk rate, by the way. And it was a powerful lesson on obligation of contracts, truly what you do about the contracts, and making sure that they're equitable for both parties. So, in today's sales conversation of sales contracts, the clarity I would like to point out is, do not throw out contracts simply because you feel greedy enough that you can do better, unless you can prove you can do better. And unfortunately, you can't really prove you can do better unless you have true commitment on the books, which after 90 days is smoke. other than contracts. Contracts are the only things that have durability past a 90-day forecast because they're on paper that says these people are going to do this. Anything else is demand. Demand is temporal. Demand has cancellation capabilities. Demand can be surge. Right now, we actually have active marketing campaigns for a lot of our clients that are talking about off dates and long term bookings to preclude people's worry about being hammered with too much high rated business because they waited too long to book. Literally, we're selling September and October right now for a lot of our hotels. Why? Because it's the time that is least demanded historically for them, least likely to be in demand for them that we're aware of. Most likely, the opportunity of people to say, well, I have a budget, and the only way this budget is going to work for me to go to this destination is to pick a time where it's affordable for me to go there. It's not my peak time. I know for many times I used to go and to visit family in Europe. We would go in the pre-winter phases, the October, Novembers, and we used to make jokes of ourselves that we traveled only when the fountains were shut down, which is what they did in Europe a lot of times. Is that when precursor to cold weather, they would shut the water fountains down and cover them up so that freezes and stuff like that wouldn't negatively impact the fountains. That's how we saw winter. It's like every time we went to Europe, it was like fountains shut down. It's like, yeah, of course, because we're picking the time of year that this is what happens because it's not a high demand time. Just like May is a massive demand time for Europe. It's beautiful spring weather. And because of that, everybody wants to go places because it's beautiful to go to them. And so the rates reflect that, as we know, the flight demands reflect that. And now we're looking at things like there's just not enough pilots for the planes. They have planes, they have purpose, they have it, but they don't have enough pilots. We can go around and around with that as to why and how and so forth. But the reality is that there's fewer flights. Do I believe most of it? I believe some of it. I believe that the airlines have been notorious and they have always pointed to themselves that they control both supply and demand, which is true. And for that reason, they can yield out better if they simply say, oh, well, we have this excuse here. So instead of 5 carrier combinations going to point A to point B, we have 3, which means the price is going to be this much more because there's less inventory to sell. They have control over the supply and therefore they can control the demand. Because if I go in and say, look, I can't get on the plane, I have to look at alternatives. Anyways, contractually, in comparison to transient, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Evaluate the durability of the contract, the enforceability of the contract, and the fences of the contract. It's a RFP, request for proposal. They ask for what they would like. You offer what you're willing to give. The key element of the contract is to say, yes, this is your parameter, but this is what we're willing to give you. You don't know what you're truly being compared against. You can guess all you want, and you can even have insights to what you think others are going to be offering, but you don't know to the level that they want that same piece of business or willing to accept that same piece of business. Don't give away the farm thinking you have to, and don't hold back saying, I'm not even going to bid because I don't want to. Evaluate by saying, you know what, take it or leave it. It's funny, we watch the show Shark Tank and so forth, and it really is a model of how dialogue contracts work out. This is what you're asking, but this is what I'm willing to offer. Doesn't mean that they're going to take it. Doesn't mean you're going to take it. Obviously, you're not because you're offering this in exchange for this. But the idea is you don't know the perception of what they truly want until they start actually on paper of what they're willing to accept. So there you have it. We spent an hour going over sales contracts, values of sales contracts, the change of sales contracts, the modality of change of sales contracts, and the comparisons of contracts. I know, super exciting, just spiffy stuff, but it's the nuts and bolts of our industry. It is the parts of our business that are needed and can have a massive negative effect if handled incorrectly. So please take time with your contracts. Treat them as opportunities that need evaluation, not insults that they are you kidding me? I'm never going to give you that. Don't look at it that way. Go back to it in the way of what is it, if I were to look at it, would be the value that I'm willing to accept for it. Approach contracts that way. So with that, I thank you all for the privilege of your time. For everyone that's watching us on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, thank you so very much. Twitch, but also on our TV channel, our TV station. You can find us on Roku, Google TV, Apple TV, Amazon TV. All of them, you can look for the Hospitality Channel. There you'll see this live show every week on the free side of that. We have some exciting news about the content that's being added to the paid side to it. Some really cool stuff that we're in negotiations with. We're going to start covering some conferences where if you weren't able to make it or whatever, to see engagements of the conferences to understand whether it might be worth it the next time around to go to it. But at the very least, exposure to the people that participate in the conferences and derive some benefit from it. So we're hoping that those things go well as well. So with that, my name is Lauren Gray. Thank you for the privilege of your time. And I look forward to talking to you all next week. Change. We don't operate like that. And to your point, internationally, there is a different work ethic associated with different cultural variations to offering hospitality. Anybody that's been to